And that's really what the collaborative is about. It's an opportunity for the timber industry and the conservation community to be at the same table, looking at how we manage the forest in a responsible way.
This is an example of the typical type of stand that we're working in the Olympic National Forest. About 50 or 60 years old, previously logged, and it's come back overly dense, heavily stocked, and we are at a point where we can do a commercial thinning activity to generate revenue as well as enhance the ecological value of the forest.
Thinning out what are called plantation stands that were just planted row by row, almost like corn, which means there wasn't a lot of understory, not a lot of diversity in the species.
The goal of having healthy, mature, structurally diverse forests that support the wide range of species that evolved here, while still getting timber out to communities and mills. That's the collaborative's goal. You have to open it up to light and air and water for everything that needs to eat and find shelter to be able to thrive and survive. We need trees to grow well. We need them for carbon capture. We need them for moisture, for capturing the marine layer that comes in and allows fog drip. And we need them for timber.
The dollars generated go straight back to the forest of origin. So that can be used to put culverts in or do some watershed restoration projects.
But you go out and you have, the foresters talking to the conservationists about, what trees to leave, what does that watershed need, and you have people of disparate interests actually, but similar skill sets working together, and it's incredibly inspiring.
We go out, lay out the project, and we reach agreement, and then the project moves forward.
And you focus all of that energy in trying to make a healthy forest.
One size doesn't fit all, and it approaches every site differently depending on the species, the stand structure, the geology, the hydrology, the climate.
A couple of our projects have been, down under 65 acres. We've gotten one larger one done in the 200 to 300 acre size, but I think that the forest and the collaborative want to see how we can do more of those larger 300 acre type size projects.
I just like to see the collaborative exponentially do more projects. Right now we're on the scale of doing one project a year.
For me, the collaborative has the potential to help solve some serious problems that we're confronting, and we have to face them. We have to face them head on.
I think it's refreshing to see folks who may not have always agreed on issues doing the hard work of trying to find common ground and see where there can be win-wins.
Given the past history of logging on this forest, we are calling on community members to help us move forward with stewardship and restoration for this forest so that we can better care for it and bring back high quality habitat for animals and also recreation opportunities for people.
There's a lot of opportunities out there to get stuff done.
One of the things that I really enjoy and benefit from in the collaborative is being able to talk across traditional boundaries.
Your legacy is not so much what you do, it's what you leave to the next generation. And a healthy forest is hopefully something that I could have some impact on.
All right, thanks for sharing that, Tom. And we will move on first to the monitoring protocol presentation. That'll be given by Resilient Forestry and Jill Silver of the 10,000 Years Institute and Bernard Borman, who has joined us here tonight. Thanks very much for being here.
Jill, unmute.
Thank you. Details. Hi, everyone. Most of you know me. I'm Jill Silver, member of the Collaborative Board and director of the 10,000 Years Institute. I work as a watershed ecologist on the Olympic Peninsula for the past 3 decades. And I am pleased to present the team from the Olympic Forest Collaborative Monitoring Program and some of the background and development of it. So we designed the monitoring program to establish whether or not the collaborative is meeting our stated goals of ecological performance in our thinning projects. And OFCO and 10,000 Years Institute originally started talking about the need for such a protocol and worked on it with full support from the entire board and with expertise and guidance from Bernard Borman, from the director of the Olympic Natural Resources Center, and with David Marshall from Sierra Pacific Industries, did a lot of field work and supported with the development of parameters for the monitoring plots and design. And Resilient Forestry led the project design itself and will present the components and details of it shortly. So together with Washington Wild, the board of the collaborative and member organizations sought funding to be able to develop and implement the protocol and the program, which is the only example of a monitoring program for a collaborative in Washington State. And we went to the Forest Health Program at the State Department of Natural Resources and received funding for that. We're very grateful for that and appreciative. And we also have gotten funding from the Harder Foundation and Northwest Fund for the Environment, and collaborative member groups have contributed to it. So I think we will just pass it over to Resilient Forestry to present all the details. Sean and Miles, take it away.
Sure. I'm going to go ahead and, Olivia, is there a chance you could allow me to share my screen?
Yeah, you should be able to now.
Okay. Let me see if we can make this work. Okay. Can folks see that as a slideshow? Is that working?
Yes.
Okay. Miles, you want to begin?
Yes. Well, Jill, thank you for that introduction. As Jill mentioned, Resilient Forestry developed and has begun to implement or helped to develop and has begun to implement this monitoring program. The goal of the monitoring plan is to quantify the outcomes of management and essentially to understand how well the treatments that are applied to these restoration projects are achieving the management objectives in terms of functional outcomes of these forests. And this is a 5-pronged approach that includes permanent photo points, where we establish points from which photos are taken through a time series over time to track the forest response to treatment. Explicit vegetation monitoring, where we establish permanent monitoring plots where we are quantifying overstory forest structure and pattern, understory forest community, diversity, fuel loading and coarse wood loading on the ground to understand wildlife habitat, and several other dimensions of forest composition and structure to explicitly monitor the forest response over time. In addition to that, we're monitoring wildlife habitat capability of these stands through some of these measurements I described earlier, establishing interpretive hiking trails through these areas to make these areas accessible to those who visit these stands to understand the key features of these treatments. And I don't think this is in here, but also aerial photo captures to understand forest dynamics over time. Here's an example of what these monitoring plots look like. These are spatially explicit stem maps of all live and dead overstory trees in these plots to understand the spatial pattern and the composition of the overstory trees. We are also installing vegetation plots and coarse woody debris transects across these treatments that we're studying. And then here is an example of some of the aerial photo imagery that we are capturing with drone-based aerial imagery. We also intend to capture drone-based LiDAR data in the future to develop a really rich data set to understand not only the questions that we have right now about these treatments, but also to have data to allow us to answer questions in the future that we might not have even formulated yet.
So I'm going to talk now about one case study of an application where we applied this monitoring plan, taking the measurements described before and after treatment, and just talk really briefly about kind of how it went, what we learned, and hopefully this gives you an example and an idea of how this approach informs our adaptive management. This is the H2Z thinning project. This is a variable density thinning that included cutting some gaps, leaving some uncut skips in the stand, and then doing some variable thinning in between those. The goal of this was to accelerate development of old forest characteristics. So promoting the health and survivorship of large trees, trees with any unique canopy structures, and then just introducing diversity into the stand. So a varied light environment with some denser patches and some more open patches, and putting the stand on a trajectory to develop late successional characteristics more quickly. Another goal of this was to demonstrate prescriptions that were a little bit more intensive and variable than the standard first entry thinning that has occurred on this forest. And then of course, we wanted to provide revenue for restoration stewardship projects associated with this. The post-treatment condition looks a little bit like this. You can see here the gap. There's some advanced regeneration, some young trees in this gap that are going to now thrive because of this new light environment. And then you can see some of the thinned areas and the dense patch in the background of unthinned area. So a variable condition. Here's sort of a look across the unit. It's thinned out, so the trees have more growing space, plus just introduces that diversity of stand conditions. Another example here. As you can see here, there's a fair amount of trees on the ground, and there was a decent amount of blowdown after this treatment happened. And to some extent that was expected, but it can also be a little bit surprising if you're not prepared for it. And so we wanted to understand this blowdown, and using the drone aerial imagery, we're able to complete this analysis of mapping all of the logs that blew down, which direction they blew down, what are their sizes, what was the distribution, what were the risk factors associated with blowdown. And this is an example of where that imagery allowed us to answer some questions that we didn't really know we would have before we started. So the vegetation plots helped us confirm that we met the silvicultural prescription. As we track this over time and remeasure in several years, we'll be able to understand how many of the ecological elements have responded to this thinning. But this imagery and the LiDAR data we intend to collect on future projects is really a powerful way to answer future questions that we didn't formulate beforehand. So we feel this was a good example showing how this monitoring program can really help us track the results of these treatments. that's all that we have from Resilient Forestry. Is Bernard on and planning on saying a few words as well? We're hoping to have
Sure.
Bernard say a few words about the significance of monitoring.
Great, thanks. I'm going to turn my video off because my internet's been pretty unstable today. Sorry about that. Yes, I was asked to briefly talk about the value of monitoring. And I think I'll just say four things. The key reason to do this monitoring is to really help us explore new ways, better ways to manage the forest. I mean, we need to try something and then evaluate how well it worked. A key question, though, is how do you know when you actually have improved something? And we talk, and you just heard about some of the data that the collaborative is collecting. I would add that just simply visuals, just having these trials out there to go look at, and I encourage you to go look at them. You can go a long ways to forming a conclusion on whether you think it's working. And as Sean pointed out, new questions emerge, like the question about wind throw. These are all benefits of monitoring. Now, I will say that when data is collected, and even if in visuals, not everybody's going to agree whether there was an improvement or not, and that's fine, because it's what we're really trying to do is better inform the debate about these treatments. I have a standard soapbox that many of you have heard me get on to talk about how important it is to formulate your questions in advance and to kind of drive what kind of monitoring you're going to do. And the group has gone through a process to do that. And some of the questions that they're addressing are things like, can late seral habitat be more quickly achieved through management activities? I personally argue that the community really ought to be involved in formulating these questions and to kind of direct the limited amount of monitoring resources that are available to help answer them. And I'll just end by putting in a little plug for the Olympic Natural Resources Center, where we've been developing this idea of learning-based collaboration. We've got a big study with DNR going on to try to look at new ways for DNR to manage the trust lands using that approach. And so I will stop with that. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Bernard. And again, if you guys think of questions throughout the chat, feel free to write them down, and we'll get to those near the end. We're gonna move on to Matt Comiskey and Brent Cisco, I think, have a short presentation on our Queets Corner project. So take it away.
Yeah, all right. So good afternoon, good evening. So real quickly, I'm going to kind of give a little bit of the background, set the stage of how we ended up and got to this point with Queets Corner, and then Brent's going to take over and kind of hit the summary points of what we got accomplished and the outcomes. But Queets Corner, quite honestly, started off with a little bit of a small project brought to us by the Forest Service that I would say the collaborative wasn't super excited about when we first got it. But the more that we talked about it, the fact that we had an opportunity and some timing worked out that we wanted a project to work on, there was a connection to the fact that the best access route was across DNR state trust lands, and DNR needed to remove a culvert under their RMAP road maintenance and abandonment planning obligations that was a fish passage blockage. It provided some opportunity to engage with ONRC and actually try to start to build out the monitoring plan you just heard about and actually get plots put in before implementation. and kind of see how we could develop that. So through some various conversations between the Good Neighbor Authority program at DNR, some conversations I had with the local DNR state lands region, we really kind of moved forward and figured out that trying to use Queets Corner as an opportunity to also explore the collaborative working with DNR through the Good Neighbor Authority and working with the Forest Service to implement a project that this was a good scale to do so, and could actually be an effective tool to test out some of the cross-boundary, cross-ownership aspects of Good Neighbor Authority, of doing things like, gee, all of the road work that needs to be done and the fish passage that needs to be piped, that needs to be pulled out on state trust lands, can we accomplish that? Plus, there were some other aquatic things in the project. So, long story short, Good Neighbor Authority was in its early infancy. DNR didn't really have a full-time staff person committed to GNA when we first started talking about this, but as Good Neighbor Authority evolved and the program started to build up, DNR had staffing capacity to devote to the implementation. And real quick, for those of you who are not familiar with Good Neighbor Authority, it is a federal authorization that allows states to sign contracts with the Forest Service. And the basic opportunity is that you can use state contracting methods to implement projects, is one of the big benefits. And so there's a lot of other nuances and efficiencies in it, but that's one of the key things. And so we ended up moving into doing a Good Neighbor Authority project with Queets Corner, and I'm going to turn it over to Brent with DNR. He's one of their, Brent, I'll let you tell your official title, but he works in the Good Neighbor and the federal lands portion of DNR, which is separate of state trust lands. So Brent, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Yeah, so I'm Brent Cisco. I'm our title out here is a unit restoration specialist, and we work for the federal program, federal lands program. So like you were saying, a different division, part of DNR. And yeah, thanks for sharing all the info, kind of the backdrop of how we're assisting, federal lands and the management and meeting the same, their deliverables and helping where we can. And obviously this project is really unique, so I'm gonna quick share my screen and get this slideshow up here and just kind of show the successes of the program or of the project Queets Corner, and kind of some things that we've had some successes with our program and how things are moving. So just a second here. Everybody see that? Good to go? Okay. Yeah, so Queets Corner was a 35.5 acre variable density thinning. Through our program, it sounds like there was collaboration of the layout and some of the road work with the collaborative and with the DNR and the GNA program. We had a contract administrator that was here before me, and so I wasn't on this project yet. So I wasn't the one that actually did the implementation and contract compliance of it, but through our program, we did sell it and did the compliance on it, and it was completed at the end of this last summer. So kind of the aquatic restoration stuff that did get done, like what Matt was saying, it's a very unique spot with the haul route was going through state lands trust, and we got an REP through it to be able to do the implementation, the planning, and selling of the wood products. And through that agreement, we pulled the last RMAT points on state lands, the state land haul route and the road. And on top of doing the non-fish culverts and decommissioning along the whole haul route of Queets Corner. And you can kind of see the outline of my presentation of what exactly was accomplished, which, even though it was a pretty small scale timber sale, it was a very diverse and complex one. And I was happy to see a project like this go through with the DNR and with Collaborative and on the Forest Service, and kind of everybody working together to get this completed. Just kind of some of the highlights on the revenue side of things. You can see that there's 747 MBF total that was shipped off the sale with a net revenue of about $8,700. So, that revenue is similar to what the Collaborative has, of where, we can put this money back into the forest with the restoration work that we're doing, and look at different diversity of projects with aquatic resources and, road work and culverts. So, and kind of like I said, like our program has a cool way of, as a DNR entity, being able to get RUPs through adjacency landowners to accomplish our projects that we're proposing across the Olympic Peninsula. So that's kind of, I guess, all I have on that. And is there anything else, Matt, that you'd like me to share?
No, I think that is great, Brent. I think, one of the key things to point out that, Brent was highlighting the road use permit issue. It's often a challenge, and we see this, in the work I do across the state, for the Forest Service, due to policy reasons at the Washington office level for the Forest Service to actually get road use permits. So you tend to be looking for easements, and sometimes landowners aren't really excited about granting a permanent easement, particularly if you're looking at pulling out fish culverts and kind of abandoning or decommissioning a road. And so having that, as I mentioned earlier, the state contracting authority, which still has to meet all of the federal NEPA and contracting requirements around, environmental protections, those type of things, but it just provides yet another tool. And so I think, there's a lot of success. Dakota, the forester that was here for most of the project, I think, the Collaborative, she took the Collaborative out on 2 field trips, put a lot of time and energy into this. So, to me, it really highlights the opportunity for success of, working and using this program.
Great. Thank you, Brent and Matt, both. We're going to move on to the Wynoochee area project, which will be Dave Marshall and Robin Scholl. And Dave, you can just let me know when you want me to share those images.
Robin's going to start out, so let her start out, please.
Great. Thanks, Dave. Hey, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Robin Scholl. I work for the Olympic National Forest. I'm the Natural Resources and Planning Staff Officer up here on the forest. Been here for a little over a year. So I'm going to give you the very briefest of thumbnail sketches. I don't have any images or any slides, just a quick brief thumbnail sketch of the Wynoochee project. The Wynoochee project was an environmental assessment. Decision for that was completed in August of this past year, August of 2021, and we started right away moving forward with doing some layout and working with the Olympic Forest Collaborative and Resilient Forestry on 2 stewardship projects that we're looking at coming out of that planning area in the next couple of years. The overall planning area, the Wynoochee watershed, it's about 70,000 acres, and somewhere along 40,000 acres of that is on National Forest System lands. The purpose of the project is along the lines of what Miles and Sean shared earlier, is to accelerate the development of that late successional forest characteristic in these stands, and also to provide, some economic activity for local communities and some stewardship funds to return back into some probably aquatic restoration projects that are associated with the revenue coming in off that off the projects out of this watershed. So with that, let's see, we have probably about 5,300 acres all told of proposed thinning units in a handful of different timber sale projects that'll be coming out of that area over the next 5 or 6 years. So with that, David, I'll hand over to you.
Okay, thank you. I'm David Marshall. I work for Sierra Pacific as a forester here in Aberdeen, timber buyer. And I'm just going to briefly go over the two projects that the Forest Service has given us permission to move forward with on the Wynoochee watershed EA. So anyways, Olivia, can you put up a boomerang first? So this boomerang sale is about 550 acres gross. We were given the opportunity to select the units, and there's a combination of the units are in both AMA and LSR. We're in the preliminary stages. We've done some roads identification. We've done some boundaries out there. We're currently conducting stand exams, and what those are is to see what's out there as far as downwoody debris, basal area of timber, species of timber, all sorts of things. And then from that, we can draw how we're going to treat those areas. But anyways, we were given this by, I think Kevin gave me this area to go look at. Kevin Sidnerick with the Forest Service probably about 2 years ago. And from this, we've selected these units. So I'm excited. It's 550 acres. I mean, I'm just taking a crapshoot. The estimated volumes can be between 4 and 6 million feet. That's given the thinnings we've had in other type projects. Harvesting systems we're going to implement in here would be traditional yard thinning, hauling the logs up the hill in a thinning type thing, ground-based thinning. And then there's some really challenging downhill thinning. Throughout this Wynoochee project, there's several units that are very challenging. Downhill thinning is not easy. It's very difficult. So that's going to be really challenging to accomplish. Silviculture wise, we're going to do some similar stuff in the AMA that we did in H to Z that Miles and Sean just talked about previously, and Jill. And we're also going to do some, basal area type thinning based on basal area, possibly some spacing type thinning, some small openings of about an acre or two. And that's what we did at H to Z. And we're going to try to do the same stuff. In AMA, we can do that. There's not really a diameter restriction, but the biggest wood out there is not very big anyway. But in LSR, which is, I saw a chat down there, AMA is adaptive management area. LSR is late successional reserve. In LSR, we can only go up to 24 inches stump diameter. So that's not a very big tree. So it's about a 20-inch tree. So we're kind of limited based on that, on what we do in LSR. So, and the next project we're going to work on is, I guess we go to the Tiger Tail project. By the way, we're hoping to get that out in fiscal year 23, which is from October 22nd, 2022 to the next year. So the fiscal year for the Forest Service. Tiger Tail is another project that we bird dogged. We've done. I went out and looked at the units. That's about the extent of it. It's our fiscal year 2024 sale. As you can see, there's 273 total gross acres, of which most of it, the majority of it's 226 acres in LSR and 47 in AMA. The positive side of that, there's quite a bit of ground thinning, which is way cheaper to do. And there'll probably be some significant more revenue per acre out here that we'll be able to do for stewardship projects. But this is in the real infant, it's a couple years out. So we have secured funding for the Boomerang project to accomplish that with the DNR has given us a grant to do that money. And as far as I know, we're not funded yet to do Tiger Tails. So those are the projects we're going to get in the work. Tiger Tail is probably going to be about between 2 and 3.5 million feet. So that's kind of where we're at on our next two projects. So that's all I have.
Great. Thank you both for that and for that, the maps. The last thing we'd like to share is a funding update. Tom, if you're around for that, that would be great.
Yeah, thanks. So real quickly, and Dave mentioned one of those. So the collaborative last year did get a grant from the Washington Department of Natural Resources for $50,000. It was a Building Forest Partnership grant. And that went to basically, fund our halftime coordinator, which has been really a step up for us over the last, couple years. So thank you, Olivia, for all your work. We also, as Dave mentioned, secured funding for Resilient Forestry to work on the boomerang sale from DNR, which we really appreciate as well. So those are kind of two updates on the funding front. And yeah, I just wanted to get that in there real quick, but I think we are basically on schedule, and I think next is seeing if there's any feedback or questions. Thanks for listening.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. So we can open up for a Q&A now. If you're familiar with Zoom, there is a little hand raise option, or you can type your question in the chat too, just so we have a little bit of order in how we do our question Q&A. Does anyone want to start us off? Yeah, I see Patricia.
Thanks, Olivia. I just wanted to say thanks to all the presenters, and I put in the chat a link. If you're interested in the monitoring protocol, it is now open for public consultation. We would really like your feedback and your questions and your concerns. So there's a link to the Collaborative's website, and you can go there, or you can call me or send me an email, and I can pass it on to our great team. Thanks, we'd really appreciate your feedback.
Thanks for that, Nancy.
Thanks, Nancy. I see Tom.
Yeah, hey, real quick, I just wanted to ask Brent, it was really great to work with DNR and the GNA early on. I think it was maybe the second, project on the Olympic for the Good Neighbor Authority. But Brent, if you could just briefly, I know that was a while ago when we started that, and I think that the program has kind of built itself and is growing. Could you just talk briefly about where the Good Neighbor Authority program is now, and what kind of maybe additional resources you have kind of gained?
Yeah, for sure. So we have grown quite a bit in just the last few weeks, actually. We brought on 2 additional engineers, one that's specific for the ONF, which is, he just did his first tour out here yesterday and kind of showed them around our projects and all the logistical challenges we're having with road infrastructure and storm damage. So I'm pretty excited to have him. He came from State Lands he's been an engineer for the last 10 years. So he's going to be a great tool for us to be using, and for me to help with implementation of some of our projects. We also are added another unit restoration specialist for the Olympic, and also the other Good Neighbor Authority locations on the Gifford, Pinchot, Okanagan, Wenatchee. They added additional help as well, but I'll have one more coming on middle of February. So I'm pretty excited to have some help in the implementation and planning stage on my end, especially as we have, as you're saying, we're getting a lot of things moving. We've got 2 sales that have been active since one that was active in the summer, 2D. That's about what was that? Was right around 400 acre thinning, and then FSB is active right now. It's about 450 acres. So we got a lot going on out here in the on the active side of things for the Olympic, and then we're kind of in the planning stage of seeing where we can continue to help out more. Obviously, there were some logistical challenges with some of the road infrastructure and stuff that were blocking some of our projects. But we're just moving forward and seeing how we can continue to help the forest as we keep going. So yeah, and we're, you know, obviously Queets Corner was a smaller one and compared to some of what we are doing right now. And you know, as projects continue, we're only going to get bigger with revenue that's coming back into our program to help with salaries and everybody else that's on, you know, that as we're hiring, and then putting the rest of it back into the forest. So it's, yeah, pretty cool how quick we've grown, and in just a little short time. So is there anything else, Tom, that you wanted me to share on that end?
No, that's awesome. Thank you.
Bernard, go for it. Never mind.
Okay. Question. Is downhill cable a common commercial thinning approach, or would it be more frequent practice not to commercially thin sites that require downhill cable? What would more experienced occurrence lower the cost? Well, I'm not sure I'm the person to answer this, but I do know there's quite a bit of downhill commercial cable thinning. And there's actually a whole new approach that's emerged called tethered logging.
Okay.
And tethered logging is a fascinating new approach where machines are dropped down through narrow corridors that can collect wood from some distance and lower, in some cases, lower the total cost, generate more revenue. And it's safer because there's less people out there, you know, operating chainsaws on steep slopes. So there's some advantages to it. I'm not sure if I'm answering the question.
Thanks, Bernard, for doing that. And thanks, Garrett, for the question. It looks like he kind of directed it a little bit at Dave, maybe to take a stab at it as well. And maybe you can add any other details.
In the 20 years I've been in Washington, I think of only a handful of acres that we've done downhill cable thinning. So, and Bernard's exactly right. There is opportunity for tether logging. That being said, there's not a lot of operators in the Olympic Peninsula that have that equipment at this time. So that's what's going to make it challenging. Ideally, if you could get a road built to the top of the unit, but it's not practical on the units that I've seen to do that, would be to uphill yard. It's a lot more safer and stuff like that. So it's going to be challenging. I mean, downhill yarding is just challenging. And I bet you Brent can answer that. Probably, they're probably doing some of that on FSB or that sort of thing. He'd be able to maybe, but it's definitely going to raise the cost. I mean, you know, cable thinning right now is $50 to $55 a ton. You know, and you get 4 to 5 loads a day out, you'd probably be able to generate 2 to 3 on downhill cable thinning. So hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, did you want me to chime in, Dave? Is that weird?
Please.
Yeah. So FSB's got a lot of downhill cable. It is, you know, like Dave was saying, it's very challenging. Depending on, you know, not all outfits are equipped for everything or to be able to do that kind of stuff. My current operators said that they're going to have a lot easier time with swing yarder, just for safety, safety and for efficiency. A lot of times, you know, the downhill cable can be done, especially if you have a lot of flat, you know, a decently amount of flat ground and run out that is happening off of the hillside. But that's not the case for everywhere. So just trying to find ways that, try to find ways that we can try to do alternate, you know, logging if we can. Obviously we can't do that everywhere. So yeah, we just kind of see where it goes from there. So. but they definitely, it's definitely hard for a lot of them. Definitely raise costs, and ultimately affects revenue and where that revenue could go someday as well. So.
If I can just pop in and add to that, Garrett asked, would downhill thinning sections be not thinned? And Garrett, yes, I mean, that is something that we would consider, right? If there's damage that's going to be done that's not avoidable, then absolutely those areas end up being skips or end up being approached in a different way. And for instance, at H2Z, that area that experienced a lot of wind throw, which was a bit of a surprise to us, wind throw and breakage and standing snags and downed wood are a really important part of forest ecology. And so in a sense, we were glad to have that. And it will be watching the wildlife use and the ability for plants to grow around and over it over time in the monitoring program. So there's just a lot to learn and a lot to think about. But thanks for that question.
I see Tom has his hand up as well.
Yeah, hey, real quick, before we wind down here, I just wanted to recognize, I know Kelly and Lawrence and Iwa Lau from the Olympic National Forest are here, and really appreciate working with them. We have quarterly meetings with the Forest Service, and it's really been great for increased communication from the collaborative. Also wanted to recognize Katie Allen from Representative Kilmer's office. As you saw in the video, Representative Kilmer has been kind of instrumental in helping us lead the collaborative efforts from really day one. And I noticed, yeah, a couple other folks that are kind of familiar to some of us. Good to see Rod Fleck, listening in, and I think Nancy Eldridge. I think she's done some forestry work with the Quinault Nation, and looking forward to working with you, Garrett. I think you're with the Nature Conservancy. So thank you, everybody, for joining in.
And with that, does anyone have any other questions or things they'd like to chat about while we're here? Looks like Matt had something in the chat. Do you want to speak your truth, Matt, or do you want to just have it in there?
No, I just gonna say there's so much that I don't want to take too much time. Garrett and I can always talk offline about the fun of logging systems. Being a professional logging engineer, trying to figure out how to get timber off the hill is always a fun part of it. But yeah, I just was gonna let him know that the real challenge is there's not a lot of it done in general. Experience, of course, always helps, but the reality is in a thinning situation, you're trying to protect the residual stems, and that means a reduction in production because you can only move so many trees so fast coming downhill for safety reasons and a whole host of other things that it limits your production, which means it's more costly.
And we have Ed with your hand up.
So how long has it been since the collaborative has met with the public? Again, last time, I believe that was Port Angeles. And I believe that was back when virtual wasn't the word of the day. I presented my need then on the Forest Service Road 3030. Never saw any action by the collaborative to address that need then. So I'll move on to what my need is now. I'm still, let me just say it in French terms, I'm very suspicious of the collaborative and what it does to improve my forest for my purposes and for my community's purposes, and not somebody else's grandiose agenda on what the world should look like. I'm interested in my community and not what the world thinks of my community. So with that said, I will use, listening to your presentations tonight, I'll use your H to Z as a great example. I recall when the topic came up about taking those receipts and applying them to the culvert project in the Sitka watershed. I, as a member of the public, I mentioned to the Forest Service, you know, we need to have a public discussion about this because that's taking revenue out of one watershed to put in another. And you know what's interesting? That never happened. So the collaborative didn't work for me there because the collaborative promoted taking that money out of the H2Z watershed and sticking it over in the Sitcom. And so right there, that creates a threat for me because that money should have been spent in the H2Z watershed. And why is that? Well, here's my need for the collaborative to get busy and work on now. The Forest Service roads. And given that at least one of the Forest Service members that's on tonight, she's very familiar with my concern. You've got Forest Service Road 29 and Forest Service Road 30 basically closed for action for an indefinite length of time, all dependent on emergency relief funds to come in and open that back up. So that's what I'm asking the collaborative. That's my form of question. Get busy, work on those two road systems, get them opened back up. If it takes some creative, innovative approach and not just depending on emergency funds to reopen them, maintaining those road systems is very critical to me. And since you've already spent H2Z funds to work on the 29 system, I think there's double bang for the buck there. So that's, I'll leave in final. I'm still concerned about the collaborative and what it does for my community, especially since we really aren't at any of these tables. My local government is not at the table. My local government is not represented on this collaborative. When Congressman Kilmer was asked in the beginning by a very dear friend in the Quinault, Mr. Keith Olson, about when was going to be his turn to be in the collaborative, the congressman assured him that there would come his time that he could be in the collaborative. Unfortunately, the gentleman passed away and didn't get the opportunity. So collaborative needs to show benefit to my community if it's going to be the voice within the Olympic National Forest system that it appears to have taking place. So thank you.
Thanks for that, Ed. I guess I'm going to just step forward and give Ed give a little bit of background about how we ended up with the 29 road milepost 16.1 project as being the project for which receipts from H2Z would be applied. And because there were no projects that had been scheduled in the Solduck watershed, which is where H2Z is, there were no aquatic projects that weren't already in the pipeline for funding. Kugel Creek is that one, big one. We worked with NPICL, the North Pacific Coast lead entity, and all of the partners in there. So the Clallam Conservation District, Wild Salmon Center, Trout Unlimited, Quileute Tribe, and others had prioritized the Kalawa Sitcom as a priority watershed. And then the milepost 16.1 project was a really big one for the forest that already had been through, Kelly, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, had been through NEPA and just needed the final engineering done. And so it was a really big, expensive project, $474,000, and the receipts from H2Z were $200,000. So that got that project a long way down the road. Unfortunately, I'm worried that the recent atmospheric river flood event might have blown out parts of that project. So we still have to get up in there or get a drone up in there to evaluate everything. I know there's some information coming out through the forest and others. So anyway, that's the story there. The ideal is to apply and our goal is to apply stewardship funds receipts to projects within the watershed where the timber harvest happens, the thinning happens, but that doesn't always happen. So thank you again for your comments and your concern for the community. Go ahead, Ed.
Yeah, go ahead.
You're muted.
My response to that is, boy, let me give you case in point, Forest Road 30, right across the highway, H2Z. Those two blowouts on 30 right now, one of them definitely needed road maintenance way back before H2Z was even around. So there's where, regardless of whether there was a project lined up, there was road maintenance needs on the Forest Service 30 right across the highway from the H2Z that could have received those funds to prevent that blowout. So let me add another little widget in here on success. Our map has proven to work in the northwest corner. In these recent events, DNR reports only one road system suffered serious damage, and that was a bridge abutment approach to one of its bridges. But the RMAP system worked for the DNR system, and that's kind of where I'm headed with this Forest Service Road 30 idea. If we'd done the road maintenance part back before the storm came in, we probably wouldn't have had the issue we have with Forest Service Road 30 now. So that's what I'm asking the collaborative to get on top of. And there's other things than just fish passage and all these other issues, because all of this is connected. If the road system's lost, not only is the economy lost, not only the fish lost, but all these other aspects, multi-use of the forest. And so that's actually what I'm asking you to do. Just not a project list, but what is the need in the community? And Forest Service Road 30 was a need at the time of H2Z. So thank you.
Thanks, Ed.
Well, thanks, Ed. And I don't know if Tom or Jill want to say any kind of closing remarks. And if not, that's totally fine. We can call it an evening because we are past our time. But thank you all so much for being here, and for to the folks who presented, and Katie and Garrett and Rod and Nancy, and hopefully I didn't miss anyone else. Thanks for being here, and we'll let you know when the next one is.
Thank you, Olivia. Thanks, everyone.
Okay. Have a good night. Take care. Go eat some dinner.
Good night.
Good night.